Welcome back. In the last video, we started working on our game. We were going to make this, guess a number game. But as we did the design document, it became clear that there was a skill we needed that we didn't yet have. This happens all the time. This is a very, very common occurrence. Is when I do top-level design, once in a while I run into an issue, whoa, that's really cool. I have no idea how to do that. And it's okay. What you have to do is you continue with the design and do the parts that you know, and then you say, before I move on, I'm going to put the main project on a shelf for a minute and make sure that I understand this new technology. Now, this is really important advice I'm going to give you here. You never want to try and learn a new idea in the context of something huge. You always want to try and pick up new ideas in isolation. So before we worry too much about how to integrate random numbers into our guessing game, let's separate that idea out and let's write a little throwaway program that simply proves that we know how to build random numbers within any range. That can be an incredibly useful skill in game programming because think how often randomization happens, right? If I have a dice game, I'm going to be able to want to roll dice between 1 and 6. If I have a card game, cards are really, an index, 1 through 52 perhaps. If I want to have a random chance, the dragon has fire, 30% of the time or whatever. Fine, I need to be able to roll something that happens 30% of the time. So I want to be able to create random numbers and work with them well. That's an important part of game programming. And we do have an example here that does this. So let's take a look at the example. Just look at final for right now, because I actually show you 3 values, but all we're really concerned with is the final outcome. Right now it's 0 because it's initialized. I hit roll the dice and I get a 74. Roll again, 87, 36, 65. And if we keep doing this, we will keep seeing numbers. And we'll see numbers in the range between, I believe, 1 and 100. I'll have to look at the code to see exactly what that range is. Okay, cool. So how do we do that? That's a very good question. We'll look at the code. And you can see that much of the code, of course, is just housekeeping. We've got HTML, and I have in here an ordinary form. I have labels. I decided to put the output in spans. Spans are like divs. They're just a little bit lighter weight. So I have a span called span raw, span 100, span final. Why do I have 3 different kinds? Well, we'll see that in just a moment. So I do have those different sorts of spans. I have initialized all of the values. Now let's take a look at the roll function. Now we'll create variables for each of the form elements. So span raw is span raw and so on. So each of these spans on the form I have a variable for. Now here's where the magic happens. Line 36. Var raw gets math.random. Now here's the funny thing. Computer programs don't actually ever really do random very well. They just can't do random. The best that they can do is they can get a pseudo-random number. And that's interesting because once we start with one number, we can find another number that is unpredictably different from it. And so that gives us a variation of randomness. Now, different languages do it in different ways. In some languages, you have to do what's called seed the random number generator, give it an initial value. JavaScript, you don't have to do that. In JavaScript, there is a special library called math with a capital M, and it has a function called random. So math.random generates a random number. But once again, different languages generate different kinds of random numbers. In JavaScript, the random number generated is a floating point value between 0 and 1. So it's going to be some long real number, 0.697538427 or whatever. Okay, yeah, that's great. How often do we need that? Well, that can be useful. If you want to use percentages, you can go just with that. But a lot of times that's not what we want, right? We want our number to be in a different format. So take a look at the program running again and see what it does. When I roll a raw number, it gives me that nasty thing, 0.585 yada yada yada. It's always going to be between 0 and 1. I don't want that. What I want is a 2-digit integer, or a 1-digit integer, right? So how do I get there? Well, you can see the algorithm in action, right? First thing I do, multiply the whole raw thing by 100. That gives me 58.54, yada, yada, yada. Now, do I want all that stuff? No, I do not. So what am I going to do? Well, somehow convert that to an integer. There's a couple of ways to do that. I can lop off all of this stuff, or I can round up. It turns out the best way to do for this particular case is to always round up. Because what I'm going to do is, if it's a 0 point something something something, I want it to be a 1. I don't want a random number of 0. I want it to start at 1. That's just what was in my title, so I'll do it. And if it's 0.99, I want it to be 100. Yes? So if I always round up, then I will get a value between 1 and 100 inclusive. Aha! Okay, so we can see that from the output. Let's take a look at the source and see how that works. So raw is the raw random number, and that's going to be some big old nasty 0 to 1 value. And I'll copy that over to span raw so I can see it. Great. Now, times 100 is raw times 100. That's sensible enough. So I multiply the value raw by 100. That can give me a value between 0 and 100. Actually, it'll be 0 and 99. You got that? Okay. Now, there's a lot of decimal nonsense on the end of that I don't want anymore, but let's copy it over to span 100 so we can see it. You got that? Yes, you've got that. Okay, great. Now we're going to do one more thing. We want to round up. Turns out there's a nice function in that math library called math.ceil, ceil like ceiling. There's a math.floor that always rounds down. There's a math.round that rounds the way you do in math class, but that turns out to not be what we want here because we're going to have unpredictable behavior. So we really actually want to do a math.ceil. That means always round up. And that guarantees that we will have an integer value between 1 and 100. Oh, neat. So what if I want dice 1 to 6? Well, I multiply by 6 rather than 100. Ooh. What if I want to flip a coin? It's going to be a 0 or 1. Okay. Just take that random. And, we can just take that random, multiply it by 2, and then see, floor it. It's going to be a 0 or a 1. So you can do variations of this sort of very simple mathematics to get values in whatever range you want. And of course, if you're a little bit fuzzy on exactly what range of values you're getting at any one time, well, take this code, download it to your own page, and manipulate this function to get values within the range that you're looking for. Does that make sense? Sure it does. So let's take a look at this again, and we'll see what it does. Every time I roll the dice, it gives me a big old crazy number. Okay, that's lovely. We multiply it by, in this case, 100. And then we round up, so I get an integer value. Oh, that's so cool. Yes, it's cool. So now we have a new skill. When we understand this skill well, we can put it into our other games. Now let's look one more thing at this source code, because I've seen some code where an experienced programmer says, seriously, you did 9 lines of code to get there? I can do that in 1 line. Yes, you can. So can I. I do not recommend it. I would much rather see you take up more room on your code editor and make things clear rather than to squeeze 5, 6 different ideas into the same line of code. Because when things go wrong, you don't want to have to fix a line of code that does 12 different things. Let's separate stuff into 1 line at a time. You know, memory is very cheap today. And it's much better to take up a lot of space and know exactly what you're doing than to try to squeeze a lot of things into 1 line. Now, I will sometimes take shortcuts on things that I've done literally 1,000 times like this. But you haven't done it 1,000 times yet. So at this point, make sure you make things very clear to understand. Are you serious? You're putting a comment in front of every line? Yes, I'm serious. Yes, because this is a good practice to get into. Make sure your code is easy to read. That way, when your games get difficult to work with, you're still going to be okay. Yeah? Okay, great. Well, we have this thing, so we're ready to put it all together and to make our number guessing game. Come back and we'll do that. Okay, I know. It's going to be fun.